Hello, welcome to the second of two webinar series on talking safety with young workers and better connecting with them. My name is Ian Wallace at the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I'll take you through this webinar. Previous webinar, we looked at why it can be difficult to communicate with young workers and the various reasons behind, particularly according to some of the important research that's been going on in this area. So in this workshop, in this webinar, we will inform you of more effective connection strategies with young workers and how this can be achieved. So you should leave this session with very improved knowledge requiring corporate approaches to better engage and communicate with young workers specifically. Just to recap, we did look at why young workers are more vulnerable, and this slide is a quick, collection of some of the key themes that came out of various research and evidence in this area. So because young workers are often employed as temporary or seasonal workers and interns, they are more likely to feel pressured to be able to perform tasks. They're more likely to avoid asking questions or raising concerns, and more likely to be exposed to risky tasks with minimal supervision. And we also looked at some key research in this area, some WorkSafe South Australian research partnering with Central Queensland University and conducted by Verna Blewett and her team, as you can see at the bottom of the slide here. So this research aimed at including the voice of young workers and other stakeholders in the development of a key strategy for action in this area for South Australia. And this obviously then translates to other states and territories. They used a mixture of methods and approaches that included a combination of online surveys of young workers with safety knowledge and interviews and focus groups aimed at gathering young worker safety stories, looking at program analysis worldwide and conducting a future inquiry workshop to determine what the strategy should look like. They also heard from key stakeholders in this area, social partners and employers and parents, etc., to canvass their opinions and ideas about what should occur for young workers. So there's 8 key areas that they identified for action that we reviewed. So just to summarise these, is psychosocial working environment, the physical working environment, precarious work-life balance, fatigue and training and education of young workers, training and education of employers, the need to hear the voice of young workers, and then the obstacles faced by employers relating to young workers. In early 2017, the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry ran a young worker safety briefing series where those briefing participants in our series of face-to-face briefings contributed to this body of knowledge by adding at least one young worker safety activity that they thought was the most useful under each of the action areas that we're going to discuss. So there were 5 action areas that research has shown that would prove useful. Those 5 are communication, involvement, openness, feedback through mentoring and support, and organisational culture. So participants were asked to add, as I said, at least one item or idea that they thought was a positive contribution for young worker safety outcomes via flip charts placed around the walls during those briefings. The slides that follow are firstly the formal research findings in each of these areas, and then followed by a slide summarising our briefing participants' responses within each of those 5 areas as well. So what approaches should workplaces use to respond? So the formal research conducted by Werner Blewett through Central Queensland University identified that young workers have a preferred learning style. So they're generally more visual learners. The material should not be information heavy, or workers may become confused and perform tasks incorrectly. So young workers should be asked and surveyed as to what their preferred personal learning styles are. Pictorial procedures and flowcharts should be utilised far more for young workers. Experiences and practicing tasks with closely supervised support is a critical feature to ensure that they absorb the knowledge in the right way and then use it. A lot more increased positive and constructive feedback is very useful and in fact expected by a lot of young workers because they are getting that through school and through social media channels as well. So those social media channels can be quite useful. Different groups like Facebook, apps like Yammer, Skype, and others that are emerging. Skype for the office. These social media communication channels can become very good for connecting with young workers. Young workers require an increased levels of checking and confirming skills and knowledge. So the briefing series responses are on this particular slide. So summarised, the attendees of the briefings talked about organisations needing to encourage openness in all aspects, the good, bad and the ugly as well, and develop relationships that generate open communication. Assigning buddies and direct supervisors were seen as valuable. Having regular meetings, catch-ups with staff, young workers particularly, and making sure that they are listened to. Managers and supervisors need to be skilled, I guess, apt or in depth with processes for this age bracket. Employers need to know and observe, employers need to ensure that young workers know and observe risks in the workplace. Employers need to cater for diverse cultures and language barriers with young workers. Encourage and commend enthusiasm to a point, I guess, is the limitation. There are some free assessment tools online. One of them is called VARC, and to help assess and determine personal learning and communication styles. Reviewing with young workers and asking for their feedback so that inductions can be improved, safety inductions particularly can be improved with their feedback. Involving them in safety meetings, providing the same message via different mediums, either paper, e-learning, face-to-face, a consistent messaging, and ensuring their literacy skills are sufficient. Leading by example and then using a tell me, show me, watch me approach for young workers. The second area that the formal research identified for improvement is in that area of involvement. So the young workers attend work straight out of school often and come from a structured environment. They need to observe and watch them perform the task. So employers need to avoid singling them out, i.e. through some sort of dedicated program, or different uniforms distinguishing young workers from others, different hats, etc. This should be avoided if possible, because this then singles them out as being different to everybody else, and that's not what they want. Employers need to design inclusive activities like visiting OHS committees, attending project meetings, programs like Mind a Mate being set up, young worker representatives, for example, with time with health and safety reps, thinking about training, design, targeting young workers. Induction training and being evaluated by young workers is seen from the research as being valuable for the objective to improve it. Having structured and agreed individual induction plans, again, that's focusing back to the learning styles of a particular young worker. Scheduling progress meetings with young workers and having a clear and well-known issue resolution procedures and contacts. And so in this area of involvement with the workshop participants' contributions, workbooks with mentors was a key recommendation. Involving young workers in problem solving and issue resolution processes. Having skilled middle management and team leaders. Safety recognition programs that support young workers and their ideas. Improvements to procedures with young worker input. Including safety in young worker position descriptions so that they are aware right from the start. Asking for and then actioning their ideas to encourage their growth and confidence. Involving young workers in safety talks, job safety assessments and swims, etc. Involving generating toolbox talks daily and genuinely seeking young worker involvement into that. SMS contact to provide reminders and give positive and constructive feedback using smartphones and smart devices. Surveying young workers to check in on their attitudes, progress, etc., so that you can get some good feedback, hopefully anonymous feedback. Encouraging young workers to speak up at workshop briefings, encouraging others to encourage them as well. Sharing short, long-term goals, listening and encouraging feedback, and introducing young workers to the organisation's HSR and OHS team. Regarding openness, the third area that the research felt was of value. So having clear, documented and well-known informal and formal feedback methods is seen as being critical for young worker understanding, and having one set of standards. A clear range of support contacts to use, not just one, but a range of support people. Checking that workers understand messages, simplifying those messages, but being sure not to leave out important parts of that. Avoiding any assumptions of young worker progress statuses, making sure that we are getting real feedback on young workers, both from them as well as their supervisors and peers. Identifying, generating an open door policy with all staff, especially young workers. And then clear recognition of young worker contributions into the workplace and acknowledging and commending them for doing so. Then the workshop briefings responses. People felt that in the area of openness, there should be a blame-free sharing of learnings, efforts to build relationships across the workplace, setting the precedent for openness at inductions, plus regular team meetings on safety topics, generating a judgment-free communications processes and procedures, rewarding young workers for speaking up and commending them for doing so, but also focusing on removing barriers or fear of young workers speaking out. Making sure an environment that feels safe. Mentors there that support free communication, constructive communication. Again, an open door policy, encouraging an open two-way dialogue with feedback between employee and supervisors. Participating, listening, valuing, inputting the experience. Communicating on a level that encourages openness. Having a focus on the supervisors for their abilities to be open and train and encourage openness with young workers. Communicate constructively without fear. engaging communication through training as well as afterwards, and then some sort of reward, value, recognition reporting systems that encourage the right safety cultures. Then the fourth area, looking at the value through feedback, through mentoring and support. So having a firm yet constructive approach within the workplace around safety, something called a just workplace culture. Having ongoing mentoring, not just for a short period and then that falls away. Ongoing mentoring is seen as crucial. Making sure that a good mentor relationship is established, and then more frequent recognition and frequent constructive feedback for young workers, because this is what they are used to and they look for. Ensuring other support staff are clearly identified, such as contact officers, HSRs, etc., rather than just the one support person. And then involving previous young workers that have had good work experiences and pairing them with new young workers is seen as valuable. Again, the workshop contributions talked about constructive performance reviews, initial and then weekly demonstrations on using equipment until the competency levels are up to standard. Regular coffee catch-ups, making sure that the person, the young worker, is comfortable. Having a safe space for communication and confidentiality. Having a cross-cultural understandings for different groups, especially dominant cultural groups. Always giving feedback, praising positive, constructive advice on areas for improvement. Coaching and buddying support on a daily basis. Taking the time for one-on-one communications, but also using other communications as well, being consistent throughout. The policy of having mentors instill culture that all workplace act as mentors, all employees act as mentors, allowing personal development for the mentors so that they can handle those tough situations that do arise from young workers. Making new staff a part of the team and avoiding isolating them. Having a number of different new staff and workers can talk and make sure that they're identifying who they can talk to. A buddy system that is ongoing with competency assessments integrated into that. One thing we saw in the briefings was a program called YOLO, You Only Live Once. Designing training around safety, specifically for young workers, and setting a training development plan for each employee based on their needs. And then the fifth area was around organisational culture. So the research talked about ensuring a good safety culture, so practicing what people preach, walking the talk, etc., and a consistently applied set of standards for safety. Making sure all staff perform the roles safely and correctly, and there's no differences in standards. Supporting and commending a reporting culture for hazards, incidents, etc. A just workplace, e.g. the same rule applies to everybody and people are held accountable when the rules are not held. Having a welcoming and supporting team, particularly for young workers, and avoiding any initiations for young workers, making sure that they are valued rather than intimidated. Appropriate work shared based on experience and knowledge. And then acknowledgement and reward for positive contributions to good OHS. And then in this area, the workshop briefing participants talked about incorporating safety and wellbeing into key company values to begin with, ensuring the positive culture occurs through inclusion and engagement, ensuring all company policies and procedures are consistently followed by all staff, managers and leaders, as well as new employees. Checking and avoiding for an old school culture leading young workers astray. Making sure the work environment is friendly. Ensuring there is one clear way to do things rather than, the documented way and the other way. Having a bottom-up approach, looking at the young worker as the most valued, not the least valued in the organisation. Clear understanding of risks, good plus bad outcomes, so people can see the outcomes and develop a sense of risk. Avoiding singling them out and treating them differently. Don't expect common sense from young workers, indeed don't expect it from anyone. Being aware that young workers are highly sensitive, even if they don't appear to be. Supportive leadership styles and making safety a part of every day, every meeting, etc. To support this, there is a valuable series of video webinars on WorkSafe Queensland's website, and this is I'm going to play it for you now, but it's a recommendation that you go and engage with these videos, and they show an excellent portrayal of the right ways and then the wrong ways to engage with young workers around safety. I certainly encourage people to go to this web link and take a bit of time to look at and then use these video webinars. They're very good. So I guess in summary, to finish this second of the two series of webinars, young workers deserve the specific attention and designed to ensure their safety. They have distinctive injury behaviour traits that need to be understood, and there's clear evidence and research that proves this. Organisations need to plan specifically for young worker safety outcomes and plan for these in the following areas: in communications, the young worker involvement in this, to generating an openness and inclusive workplace, having planned feedback and mentoring support that is ongoing and long-lasting, and having the right organisation-wide safety culture. And these 5 action areas are seen as having the most benefit, both from the research we've looked at, but also from the previous workshop participants and their contributions to this body of knowledge. So I hope you've enjoyed these 2 webinars. I hope they're beneficial, and if you're looking for any further assistance, then you can contact myself, iwallace at victorianchamber.com.au, and I certainly thank you for being a part of our webinars for this Young Worker Safety series. Thank you and goodbye.